about a report that he recently completed that kind of looks at the state of practice in cities around the world and as it relates to climate action. So thanks, Jake, for taking the time to be with us tonight, and we're excited to hear from you.
Great, thanks, Liz. I'll see if I can do the screen share here effectively. I think I've got Zoom figured out at this point, but let me know if this has not popped up for folks. Really thrilled to be with everybody today and share a little bit more about some research that we completed, as well as some kind of ramifications, replications for Denver. So as Liz mentioned, my name is Jake Elder. I'm fortunate to be on the Science and Research Committee supporting you all and the greater kind of Denver climate agenda. But really here today, I wanted to just share a bit more about some research that we found from research into over 300 cities around the world and their climate action. So just to start, as Liz mentioned, Bloomberg Associates is a pro bono, totally free consulting service. We're a part of Bloomberg Philanthropies. And really our mission is to go improve quality of life in the cities we work in around the world. At the moment, we're working in a host of cities in North America, Europe, and then Lima in South America. So particularly active in Atlanta, in Newark, in Detroit, in Chicago, and then London and Milan are probably getting the most attention at the moment. But really for the conversation today, I'm going to focus more on research. As many of you know, the last 5 years have really been this amazing opportunity where we've seen cities all over the world really increase their ambition around climate action. The stats here show it. Almost 2,000 cities have declared a climate emergency. Mayors left and right are setting net zero targets, and no longer just net zero targets by 2050, right? 2040, 2030, moving forward. So that ambition is really great, but the challenge is that cities haven't been quite as quick to mobilize and actually reduce emissions. And so there've been a few different studies. There's one from Brookings on the right here that shows that many cities are not just failing to meet targets, they're actually going backwards. And even many of the cities that have gone further and are on progress to meet their targets, most of that progress has been driven by changes in energy supply and renewables, which is great, but that's for the most part under less control of city government than transportation policies, buildings policies, and the work that you all are doing. So at the Bloomberg world, we really just wanted to understand why cities were falling short, what was keeping them from really moving to action, and then where the philanthropy could be helpful in kind of catalyzing additional action or investments to overcome those challenges. So with that, we launched this process over 18 months where we did interviews with 50 senior leaders in cities around the world, a survey of another 300, and then a deep technical analysis of a number of kind of climate action tools. And you see the cities here on the right side of the page. So, good global kind of perspective here to really just understand and learn more about what they were doing and, how much progress they had made and where they'd been held back. As you'll see on the map, we spoke with everybody from, global mega cities like Dubai or New York City or Toronto to some smaller island communities in the Pacific and a number of communities in South America. So really got a diverse perspective on what's working and what's not from cities that have done a lot and cities that are really early on in their process. I'm going to move through the research piece relatively quickly because I'd love to talk about kind of the ramifications for Denver and then answer any questions you have. So please forgive me if I move a bit too quickly, but I'm happy to circle back to anything that folks might want to cover. This piece, I think, just reinforces the top line message that we know from the data, right? So we surveyed cities and we asked them kind of how much progress they had made on varying stages of what we call the climate journey. So from understanding, that means completing greenhouse gas inventories in particular and gathering baseline data, to planning, which is completing climate action plans and setting targets, to execution, which is starting pilot projects and ultimately implementing at scale, and then to monitoring and tracking results on the back end. And I don't think anything is too surprising here, but the fact of the matter is that cities really aren't taking action at scale. Only 20% or so of cities reported that they were doing that. And what was really interesting to me is that when you start trying to slice that data and figure out, well, what's unique about those 20% of cities that are doing more, there really isn't too much. So
hey, Jake.
Cities. Yes.
Sorry to chime in just for a minute. We just got a request from the interpreters just to slow down a little bit since they are interpreting. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the reminder. So there really wasn't too much that cities were doing that was consistent in terms of what drove implementation at scale. So the fact that cities had climate plans didn't necessarily drive increased implementation at scale. mayoral champions didn't drive implementation at scale. The one thing that we could pull out, and this will probably resonate with many of you, is that in cities where the finance department really bought into the climate agenda, we saw a much more meaningful kind of traction in terms of climate progress. So that's really interesting. And when we get into findings and what we do with this work, we'll come back to that piece that CFOs are really critical to unlocking action. But we went deeper than just progress, and we wanted to understand what was holding cities back. So there are 4 issues here on the page, and I think in the Denver context, you all are doing really well on at least 2 of these, so that's really exciting. Finance across the board, top challenge for everybody, and y'all are really ahead of the game there with the Climate Protection Fund and the resources that you have and are raising to deploy to really transform the city, so that's great. The other piece that I think you all are really doing well on is staff and project management capacity. Most cities have 1, 2, 3 people focused on sustainability and urban climate issues. Denver, I don't know the specific number, but I know it's well more than 2, 3, 4 at this point. And I think the key here is that that staff capacity does not necessarily need to be technical expertise, right? I think a lot of cities have access to the experts, whether they're consultants or in-house in departments, to make sure that the technical designs are right. But really what we heard is that cities need staff that can take a project or take an idea and really run with it and make it real. And that oftentimes, those 2, 3, 4 staffers are split between 4, 5, 10 projects and really can't devote the effort it takes to make something happen that wouldn't happen on its own. The 2 other areas here that I admittedly don't know as much about where Denver's at, but are probably more opportunities, are this piece around operationalizing sustainability. And what we mean by that is taking sustainability out of a climate lens and really taking it across all of city government. So how do you set up the systems and incentives to encourage departments of transportation, departments of city planning, water departments, et cetera, to act with sustainability and climate as their number 1 or number 2 priority, and not just a nice to have after what they think of as their main agenda items. And then in parallel with that, how do we empower cities with outcome data to show that climate policy is good city policy? I think most of the folks on this call know that effective building decarbonization efforts actually do things like improve public health. Effective mobility strategies do things like reduce traffic fatalities. Those sorts of measures and those sorts of impacts are really what can help make the case to senior city leaders and to the public for why these policies are important. And as a community of practice, we probably haven't done as good a job at focusing on those data points. And instead, I think we focus more on emissions, for example. And emissions, are ultimately what matter for all of us today, but are probably 2nd or 3rd on our priority list when it comes to a mayor's agenda. The other piece we looked at was tools. And these are tools that could help basically provide some automation or some data transformation to help cities move further faster. When we looked at this piece, we found that most of the work to date has really been focused on those upfront pieces around understanding what a city's emissions footprint looks like and developing climate action plans. There hasn't been much work spent on implementing projects or on project level design or on communication and how cities and tools that can help cities report back out to the public as to the impact of their work. And even those investments on early phases like greenhouse gas inventories, I'm sure the city colleagues on the line can share this perspective, they don't work very well. And in many cases, the efforts to date have actually made life harder on cities. The effort required to develop a greenhouse gas inventory takes a lot of time and effort, even when there are tools there. So trying to think about ways in which future tool investments can make those early phases easier so that cities can get to the hard part, which is actually taking all the projects and ideas and making them real. The last piece here, and these were recommendations that were kind of framed in the context of what philanthropy can do, but I think they are really relevant for you all and your work. The first is building this culture of sustainability throughout city leadership. That gets to the operationalizing piece. It's thinking about things like different incentive structures for senior leaders. And the example there that comes to mind was from San Jose, where they've adapted their city council presentations. And so any item that's brought in front of city council has a box that needs to be checked that speaks to the climate impacts of that proposal. You can leave the box blank, but if you leave it blank, you're going to draw questions, right? So it's just thinking about some of these subtle things, different budgeting strategies, different incentive strategies to force everybody in city government and everybody at the top of city government to be thinking about sustainability as part of their job. The second piece I think I talked a bit about, but it's really how do we focus intentionally on supporting individual projects and not high-level plans. For the most part, the community of practice really knows what the high-level plans need to be. The nuances of how much you need to focus on electrification versus different transportation policies might vary by city, but for the most part, we know the answers there. And so how do we really focus on what does Denver do in terms of a specific buildings ordinance or in terms of a bike lane strategy, et cetera, and really get into those project details sooner rather than developing plans. And then the third piece I'll call out here is this regional or metro scale action. We ran some numbers and I was shocked, but when we looked at 25 of the larger cities in the US and their emissions footprints, we found that only 1/3 of metro scale emissions occur in what I would call the anchor or the main city. And so that means if we all are just focused on Denver's emissions, we're missing the opportunity to really impact the bigger pie, which is the broader metro region. And so, I think most people, when they think about that, they think about transportation patterns. That's a big one. But also, how can the mayor of Denver and Denver's leadership team support the surrounding communities and smaller towns in their own action? Maybe that's providing some extra expertise. Maybe that's ordering some regional bodies to lobby at the state or national level. But really, how do we use the kind of intellectual firepower and capacity that larger cities have to support the broader community? And then the last piece here around targeting investments is really just about making sure that we don't take a one-size-fits-all approach to different cities. We know that some cities have more regulatory power in the first place. For example, cities in the US, Denver and New York among them, have really strong power to regulate existing buildings. I'm also doing work in London, and the Greater London Authority has no ability to regulate existing buildings. And so this is really just thinking about how do you really target those programs in ways that account for the fact that a building performance standard or a mandate in terms of building emissions in London won't work, whereas that might be one of the more effective things that Denver could do. With that, what does this all mean for Denver? So I've already hit on a lot of the points here. You all already have a dedicated cabinet level office and predictable revenue streams, which really puts you ahead of the game. But as you all think about what you can be doing next, I'd be thinking about those metro scale communities, gathering better impact data, and building buy-in across departments. Lastly, I'll just wrap up here with a couple examples of specific kind of types of interventions that you all might take as inspiration for your work moving forward. So one of the cooler things that we've been doing at Bloomberg Associates is neighborhood mapping as a tool for resilience planning. And you see a map here we developed in London that overlays a number of socioeconomic factors alongside heat risk to help inform the city's targeted efforts on different heat interventions, green stormwater infrastructure, tree planting, et cetera. For a long time, there wasn't really granular data that we could trust to do this sort of analysis, but it's now out there. And it can be a really powerful tool for community engagement and for targeting of programs, right? Imagine launching a community grant program for green stormwater infrastructure and requiring any applicant to show on a map, that they were in a heat priority area, and not just because it's hot, but because of equity factors like, health conditions and, the broader tree canopy in the area. This work can be really powerful, and it's also a really great communications tool, and it's something that could be applied not just to heat, could be applied to flooding, could be applied to air quality, and so on. The second piece I'll hit on here is the connection between climate and housing affordability. And this is a bit more wonky, so I'll just hit 3 different ways in which that can kind of play out. The first is energy burden, or the portion of the population that's paying more than 10% of their income towards utility bills. In Denver, my understanding is that problem is not as big as it is in other places, but obviously there's a big connection there, and low-income retrofit programs can be really powerful in both reducing emissions, but also helping residents save money on their utility bills. The second piece, and if you haven't done any kind of research into this, it's worth doing some Googling. I think there were some good New York Times articles on this at one point, but fossil gas heating, and in particular cooking, is really terrible for air quality. And leading cities, San Jose and Berkeley among them, have started to ban new gas hookups altogether. But there might also be some opportunities to, again, do some low-cost funding programs to help low-income or marginalized communities, replace their gas stoves with electric stoves, or otherwise get fossil gas and methane out of buildings, purely from a public health perspective. It also has a climate benefit, but the public health impacts are really major. And then the last piece, and this one I won't really pretend to have the answer on, but there's this intrinsic connection between housing affordability and climate vulnerability that I don't think we've yet figured out how to solve. So when you look at the areas that are typically most vulnerable from a climate perspective, whether that's heat, flooding, et cetera, they're often areas that marginalized communities have ended up living because they were the cheapest places to live. But we want to help those communities probably, in essence, relocate in some cases, because we know that if they're in a flood zone, and Staten Island's a good example, parts of Staten Island are going to continue to flood. And so finding strategies that are proactive in terms of housing affordability and in some cases relocation. Again, I won't pretend to know what the answer is there, but there's some inspirational work in Minneapolis and Chicago that at least can put a starting point for folks. And then 4 ideas just to wrap up. I won't go into the details here, but in terms of bigger picture kind of things that I don't think any cities have quite figured out, embodied carbon's a big one. So you'll see the stat here in terms of carbon emissions from new buildings. About half of those emissions come from what's called embodied carbon, or the carbon that goes into the construction of the building in the first place. And those are often not accounted for in greenhouse gas inventories and not planned for from a city climate perspective. Building performance standards are also really interesting, and I was excited to see that in the Energize Denver Task Force recommendations. And then on the mobility side, thinking about car-free cities and more pedestrian-friendly neighborhoods, as well as kind of new innovative strategies to tackle the delivery crisis that is choking many of our streets. And as somebody who's in New York City, the amount of just delivery trucks every day that block traffic and create health and safety issues as well is just astronomical. So thinking about new ways of getting folks their packages, but maybe making things safer. I'll pause there. I went through a lot really quickly, and I know there's more on the agenda, so I'll just leave this page up for a moment. We did release the full report publicly, and it's on the Bloomberg Associates website. And I'm also available at jelder@bloomberg.org if you have any questions or would like to follow up. But really, thanks for the time today. And I've been really inspired by all the good work happening in Denver so far. And I'm looking forward to continuing to support the progress.
Thanks so much, Jake. That was great. Yeah, I just wanted to reflect a minute, my own perspective, doing this work. A lot of what you found in talking to these cities around the world really resonates. The need for implementation, really moving from planning into implementation. And we talk a lot about the importance of science-based targets. We're going to talk about that tonight. We talk about analysis and data gathering, but at some point you have enough data to know what the right things are. What the right moves are, and you just need to start moving towards, implementing those things. And so it was great to see this overview and some really great ideas of things that we're excited about moving towards in the future. The building performance policy is something that we're really excited about moving forward. I know there's a lot of great transportation things in the works with the transportation group, and many other projects that we've got kind of in our queue and in our list, and things that this committee as well is really excited about. So thank you for that. We would love to take any questions that anyone has. So feel free to unmute yourself and chime in, or if you want to raise your hand, I can call on you, however you want to do it. If you can't find the raise hand function, just, unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question to Jake.
I just wondered if you could share that link either in the chat or send it by email, because I think all the members of my committee would really like to see the report, and I'm sure others.
Yeah, I'll drop it in the chat right now.
Jake, could you share a little bit more about finance's role and what that, if it's just the buy-in from the finance leadership, or what about that has made those cities so successful?
That's a great question. I might take it in 2 different lenses. So the first is project level, and a great example where I think we've seen some good success at the project level is around electric buses. And C40 did this fascinating event series where they organized a bunch of what they called finance academies, where they brought together senior finance folks and transportation or public transit folks to collectively workshop pathways to buying new electric buses. And in that case, you had smart, passionate finance staff that when they started to understand the cost structure for electric buses, and that actually it was a good economic investment. It was just a shift of the resources. There was more money required up front to buy the buses. There was a greater investment required in charging infrastructure. But once you had that in place, the operational costs were way lower. They were able to really quickly accelerate, some massive bus electrification efforts in a number of cities. So those sorts of project level pieces where you're just really partially helping the sustainability staff make the case and speak finance, right? To help convince CFOs or their deputies that these are good investments. But then also, I think there is a systematic piece here that's really important. And this is really cutting edge, but a couple of cities, Pittsburgh and Stockholm in particular, have come up with climate budgets. And so these are, in essence, attempts to incorporate climate considerations into the typical city budgeting process. And that tends to be really focused on emissions. I won't take up time getting into the wonkiness of that on this conversation, but it's a way to totally transform how you think about budgeting and the outcomes that you're getting for dollar you spend. And if anybody's interested in that, I'd be happy to have a follow-up conversation.
Thanks, Naomi. Great question. I see Jay has his hand up.
Yeah, Jake, thanks. That was awesome. My question is, there's so much good information here and it's changing so fast. This seemed like this was a discrete report that you did, but how do we, and we can talk offline about this, stay abreast of what's going on in what organizations can we continually be tapping into? And I don't know if you have an easy answer, or if that's something maybe our committee should think about and report back.
We should probably think about it and report back. I think, the global city networks are one great resource. So, USDN here in the US and then C40 being the bigger, global network on this stuff are great, opportunities for case studies in particular. But I think it's worth some more intentional thought, and I don't have a better answer. I mean, we tried for a long time, Bloomberg Associates maintains a database of every city and their climate goals and, their greenhouse gas inventories year over year. But we probably haven't updated that in a year because we got distracted, and it's really manual and time intensive to keep it up. So I'm kind of ducking the question, but would love to brainstorm more with you, Jay, on that, and maybe our next subcommittee meeting.
Sounds great.
Thank you. Any other questions before we move to our next agenda item? Okay, hearing none. Thank you so much, Jake. Really appreciate your time. I know it's late for you.
Thanks, Liz, and thanks, everybody. Keep up the great work.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Okay, well, you may have noticed I slapped together the agenda very quickly, and it turns out we have a lot to discuss, and I left something out. So we normally do committee report outs, and we do need to do that. We have two committees that have proposals for us to vote on this evening, for you to vote on this evening. So what I'd like to do is to go first to the three committees that do not have action items, and then we will go to each of the committees that do. So if that's all right, I'm going to start with transportation. So Stuart and Naomi, if you would please give us your report out for the month.
Stuart, do you want to go ahead or do you want me to?
You go ahead, Naomi.
Okay. Since our last meeting, we've been working to create some structure within our subcommittee with our ultimate hope of bringing you all some recommendations to consider at the November meeting. So we've created, we're calling them work teams. We're calling our project scoping team. So to really dig into the details of some of the proposed ideas we want to bring to you all, thinking about the equity lens for each idea. What are the greenhouse gas emissions that are associated with the recommendation, costs associated. So that group's really digging into the details to help us and assess those ideas. We also have a work group that's looking to help create that next list of ideas. So looking at the task force's report, pulling together best practices and other ideas that have been successful in other cities. So that's our new idea generation group. We also have a group that's really vetting what are the potential policies that we could recommend to this group to then recommend to the CASR office. And then one group that's really looking at our equity questions and also, how we might engage community members and stakeholders in the ideas that we are assessing. So we've made some really great progress in creating that structure and look forward to bringing you all some recommendations at the November meeting. Stuart, anything to add?
I'll just add that 3 areas that we're particularly looking into is enhancing the transit experience, looking at increasing frequency and buying up service. We're also looking at telework initiatives as an opportunity for us in moving forward. And we're having much discussion around parking management, but we haven't quite given it shape or form yet. But those have been the 3 areas that we probably discussed the most.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions for the Transportation Committee? All right, then let's go over to energy. Energy, tell us what's been going on.
Armando, do you want to take this? Do you want me to start?
Sure. Yeah, I can go ahead and start. This month we had our liaison Johnny actually run through a lot of the existing and new energy programs. And we also talked a little bit about community, how to adapt community resources and engagement and get people aware and involved in these programs. So we talked a little bit about municipal distributed energy resources, the renewable Denver community solar, the Denver Solar Co-op, residential energy rebates, distributed energy resource incentive programs. It was really packed with a lot of information, and we are still kind of developing kind of our strategy to bring those programs into kind of a community lens and see how we could, get more people involved in the co-op. We're also asking some questions about, what how these programs serve the equity portion of, the 2 sets of priorities we have between rapid decarbonization and equity, and how some of these programs maybe lean one way or another, and trying to come up with a total strategy that balances it all. And I think I might be speaking a little too fast.
Yes, so I think as far as what we're still trying to figure out, and something that might be helpful to connect with members and leaders from other committees on is, we're trying to figure out as a group, what is our role / our interest in doing outreach to do education and make some of the existing programs the city already has on the energy front accessible to more people in Denver and get more folks signed up. And I think there's some back and forth in the group as far as, not having been formed as a committee when some of those programs were created. And so not being completely bought into every aspect of it, for example. And so we're trying to figure that out as a group. And if any of the other committees are figuring out how you're kind of conquering and dividing outreach to communities and what that looks like, we'd love to learn from what anyone may have done already or is thinking about doing as we start to think about that. And then the other thing probably worth mentioning is that we have a wonderful teammate named Dara, who is interested in doing the kind of subcommittee coordination across our groups. And so if any of y'all have folks in your groups that do want to connect inner committee at all, I would love to put you in touch with Dara so they can make sure we're coordinated. I think that's all we've got.
All right, thanks. Anyone have specific questions for energy? Okay, and then
Sorry,
Oh, go
Emma,
ahead,
I
Lori.
just wanted to say that the cross committee suggestion was one I think we're really interested in. Frankly, we just haven't gotten to it yet, but don't be discouraged if we haven't reached out yet, because I know I hear about it a lot and we'll take you up on it. So thank you.
Awesome. We'll look forward to it. Thanks, Lori.
All right, thanks. Let's go over to the Buildings Committee.
So, excuse me, this is Stephen and Aaron. I'm going to go ahead and start for us. The big news is the Energized Denver Task Force presented their recommendation. So if you haven't seen that, I'm putting a link to that in the chat. And so we've been, through our committee talking about that and what are the things that we can do to start creating programs to support the buildings as they start going through that. So this last committee, we spent a lot of time working on, Katrina Magnan has a intern in her office that's working to create a online library of basically a webinar library. And so we spent a lot of time talking about what were the types of topics that should be included, wanting to use some of the existing content that's out there in this world of sustainability. However, we also, I think, came to a conclusion that a lot of our building owners and homeowners would better take to it if it was a lot more localized. So how can we kind of take some of the great ideas and some of the content that's out there, but then tie in some great success stories that are here in Denver, right? Because our climate is different than, say, Seattle or New York City or whatever. And so trying to make sure that we take some of the great ideas, but yet localize it too. So we spent a lot of time working through that, dividing it up between existing buildings, new buildings, and then looking at homes and existing homes, knowing that homeowners and building owners like two totally different kind of constituents there. But I think it goes back to what Anna was talking about a little bit in this whole outreach piece, is that how do we, I think that, as we start looking at how we reach out to whether it's building owners or whether it's residents or whomever, right, there's going to be a lot of overlap as far as what kind of programming and how we do it. And I think what we were talking about is there's also a lot of the resources, right? So the coordination of that to ensure that the resources are being used in the best of ways was part of that conversation. And then the only other thing is that I'll announce, they did announce the Energized Denver Awards, which our committee was part of the reviewing and the selection of the winners for that. And those were announced at the Colorado Real Estate Journal conference for property management, which was, I think, about 2 weeks ago now, or 3 weeks, I can't remember, at which we actually did have a panel, just FYI, on kind of what's going on in Denver on the sustainability space. So I moderated it and had some great panelists that talked about everything that's going on here so that property managers would be aware of things that are coming down the pipe for them in that. Aaron, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I guess just
probably talked way too fast, so sorry to the interpreters. I have a hard time stopping.
well, and also you're clearly in the witness protection program there in the shadow. But
yeah, the sun.
Just to add a little bit of detail, or a little bit more detail, to be clear, the Energized Denver Task Force recommendations that were presented, or that will be presented to council, are for multifamily and commercial buildings over 25,000 square feet. And then that webinar library that Stephen was talking about, we really dove deep into building a resource for buildings and homes professionals, specifically that need to be getting continuing education credits every year. So tying those things together to really make it make those resources valuable to those industries and that community. And then also, like Stephen said, there was a lot of opportunity to collaborate with the Urban Land Institute and some of the content that they've already had created. So we spent a lot of time just really dialing in and focusing on how that is best going to serve the buildings and homes community. But other than that, that was our focus for our last meeting.
Great, thanks. Any questions for the building committee? All right, so what I would like to do next is this. We have proposals from the Science and Research Committee and from Resource Management. And then the tail end of our meeting today is going to be a spotlight on CareJ. So what I'd like to do is go to Science and Committee first and let them present their policy recommendation. Then we'll go to Resource Management. Then we'll do the rest of our the agenda, which is update on Climate Protection Fund and a few other sundry items, I suppose. And then we'll end with the last 20 to 30 minutes on CareJ, and Marcel's going to lead us in that. So Science Committee, you are up and you get to present the first policy recommendation that you have for this group to vote on. Take it away, Science and Research.
Okay, so on behalf of Lisa and I, we were going to present our recommendations for community-wide climate goals for Denver, which really were in line with the most recent climate science. We've worked very closely with Liz on this. So Liz, if you're cool with it, go ahead and present on behalf of all of our conversations, and thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jay. So we had a pretty robust conversation with the committee over the past several weeks about Denver updating its GHG reduction goals citywide. So cities are typically setting goals for their emissions reductions, and we are required to do our goals in line with the climate science per the ordinance that actually created CASR. So our current goals for 2030, our current goal for 2030 is a 45% reduction from a 2005 baseline. That was set back in 2018. So that goal predates the most recent IPCC report that just came out. And so we were able to access some free technical assistance through our participation with these global networks that work on climate with cities. And so we are a member of ICLEI, which is an organization that works primarily with local governments around the world. They're one of many partners that is working globally to make sure that actors at all levels are making commitments that are in line with the climate science. And so they have a program, there's a global program called Race to Zero. And that's actually sort of all sectors of society. So it's business, it's government, it's the NGO sector. There is a Cities Race to Zero program that we have joined. And through that, we were able to get some free technical assistance to do an analysis for us to determine what our science-based target should be for Denver. And I'm just going to drop into the chat a link to a science-based targets for cities guide, which outlines the methodology. If you're somebody who really wants to get into what is the methodology behind this and how was this calculated? This has all of that content. ICLEI, there's 3 different methodologies for calculating city science-based targets. And ICLEI, which is the organization that we are a member of that provided the technical assistance to run the calculations to do our science-based target for 2030, uses the World Wildlife Federation's methodology that takes into account our, the required emissions to get to the 1.5 degrees Celsius, limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And then it uses our 2019 greenhouse gas inventory for Denver. It also looks at other factors, and it's essentially our share of our contribution towards this global goal. And so because we are a slightly higher emitting, wealthier country, we should be taking on a greater share than other cities and other places around the world. So based on the calculation that they did using that methodology, they're recommending a 62.8% reduction in our community-wide greenhouse gas emissions, and would also be updating the baseline year from 2005 to 2019. And that actually just makes the goal more stringent. Our emissions were higher in 2005 than they were in 2019. Also, we have a better comparison because methodologies for these inventories change over time. And so the 2005 inventory was robust, but we used slightly different methodology. We had slightly different access to data at that time. So the 2019 inventory being more recent is going to allow us to do a little bit better apples to apples comparison going forward. So that is the recommendation. Grace sent the details in the email as well, and I am happy to answer any questions that you all may have about that.
Liz, 2 questions came up as we shared this. Oh, sorry, Miss Lucy, go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to know what it was the limit of the degrees. I can understand the number. What was the limit?
1.5 degrees Celsius.
Okay, thank you. Okay, era 1.5.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Naomi.
Within the technical assistance you all received, was there discussion around an interim 2025 goal as opposed to 2030 goal?
No, mainly because the ICLEI support is sort of aligned with what the IPCC recommendations are, and the IPCC recommendations focus in on two kind of key dates, 2030 and 2050. So 2030 for us was an easy early win to go through this process and to understand what that goal should be. Our current goal is 80 by 50. We know that that goal is not aligned with the climate science, but we are still in internal discussions about that long-term goal. The short-term goals definitely drive, near-term planning more than that, like a 2050 deadline would. And there's a lot more policy conversations we need to have about 2050 because the IPCC recommendation is net zero by 2050. There have been criticisms of the concept of net zero because in some cases, some organizations are using that as a reason not to reduce emissions in the near term and use other approaches to sequester carbon down the road or to buy offsets or other things. And so we really still need to evaluate what type of goal we want to set for that longer term goal. And if it is net zero, what parameters we want to put around that to make sure that it's really robust and that we're primarily focusing on reducing emissions. We also agree that it's important to have a 2025 goal, and we're still discussing what that should be as well, but we don't have any science-based guidance for what the 2025 goal should be. That's not part of the ICLEI program, and we don't have a methodology for calculating that. So we're looking at the Climate Action Task Force recommendations. The 2025 goal was a 40% reduction, and the long-term goal was actually 0 emissions by 2040, which is very aggressive. And probably would be one of the most aggressive goals in the world if we were to choose that goal. So I think we're looking at that and we're trying to figure out how that aligns with the science or what parameters we need to put around that goal, whether it's 0, whether it's net zero, and what the exact date is. So 2030 is a lot more clear for us. It's a little bit easier for us to go through that process and use that methodology that's already been established to come up with that % reduction.
Liz, thanks so much for the proposal and for the overview and answering these questions. I guess I just wanted to comment because we brought this up in the Energy Committee, and I wanted to echo the previous comment about the 2025 goals because that's something that just did come up in our committee as well. And so I think there's overall interest in looking at what that near-term goal could look like, but I understand there's hurdles to getting there.
Yeah, and we're hoping to move that forward too. We are working on that. We just don't have a recommendation for you today on that, but we recognize that it's important. So we're being opportunistic to take advantage of this resource that we have through the Race to Zero program and bringing forward this 2030 recommendation now so that we can be timely with the SAC meeting and bring this forward as we have the opportunity to discuss it. So.
Liz, could you maybe clarify once again the differences between where Denver would be in 2030 if it followed the 80 by 50 plan versus what this proposal will result in?
Yeah, so our current goal in the 80 by 50 plan for 2030 is to reduce emissions by 45% by 2030. With based on a 2005 baseline. So the baseline year is less aggressive and the goal itself is less aggressive. So this is moving us forward pretty significantly in terms of the ambition of the goal. And it's really about equity as well, recognizing that higher emitting countries that have greater historical emissions have to do more to reduce their emissions than other countries who have contributed less to the problem globally. So it's a statement of values as much as it also is a scientific target that we are aiming towards that's directing our planning efforts and implementation. Eileen, yeah.
I'm really excited and supportive of this idea and this policy recommendation to improve this, make this goal more aggressive. I think my question is more about how do we put the umph behind a goal like this? And Grace, maybe you can explain this a little bit more, but I'm all for a goal. I love an aggressive goal, but how do we ensure that kind of back to Jake's presentation, how do we ensure the systems are in place so that that goal is realistic, and that not only have we set our aspirations high, we've also begun the conversation or have systems in place to actually achieve that goal?
I can chime in too, but so I was just going to say, and Grace, feel free to add as well. I completely agree. Implementation is key to all of this. A goal doesn't mean anything if you're not resourcing that goal and you're not moving towards implementing. But the flip side of that is also that we are required as an agency to set our goals on the science-based targets. So that's why we've done what we've done. We're saying this is what the science says is required to align with the most recent, IPCC report. So that's why the goal is what it is. And then we have to exactly do what you say and sort of figure out, okay, we are serious about implementing and we need to resource this.
Yeah, and I think I would add to that, as a city agency, you, the public, hold us accountable, and city council holds us accountable too. So this Friday, I will be giving our budget presentation, and the primary metrics that we show to council at the beginning of our annual budget presentation is the city's greenhouse gas emissions inventory, which is just a pie chart, which shows the snapshot in time, which I'm sure we've shown you that at the beginning of our meetings. But we also show a bar chart, which shows the change since we set our goal. Right now, that bar chart is set at the 2005 baseline. So if CASR were to, if SAC recommends this goal and CASR changes its goal to the science-based target, those charts will change, or at least the trajectory, the bar chart will change, and that will be public. And so we as an agency will be held accountable. And of course, that goal will apply to the next administration. And so that will be something that the public and you can track over time. And, eventually city budgets do need to line up to allow agencies to meet their goals. And it really shows where our values and our priorities are. So you're right, it's hard. It won't be easy to meet the goal, but we can't even begin to get there if we don't set it first. Looks like Stuart has his hand up.
I think Stephen's first.
Oh, I missed that. Oh, sorry, Stephen, I missed yours blends in with the background. Go ahead, Stephen.
That's okay. So kind of paying off a little bit of what Eileen is, I get where I get what Liz you're saying around the science-based and et cetera, but I guess one of my concerns is back to, talking about aspirational goals, but yet they have to be implementable. And I have a huge concern about what that price tag is going to be and where that money is going to come from in order to make that happen. That was a big conversation right through the Energized Denver Task Force, talking about incentives and all these other things that need to happen. And I think it seems like the conversation is going to be a lot more difficult of a conversation when we talk about single family or, homes or single family residences, I guess, and those that are smaller, like, say under 3 units or whatever kind of parameters around it. And especially those in the under-resourced communities, we're always talking about the equity. So I guess I just want to put that out there, that's my biggest concern, is just the financial impact that's going to have. And I realize the city budget, to Grace's point, I guess we need to kind of put our money where our mouth is. But when you look at all of the other things that are already kind of somewhat under-resourced in our community, I guess that would just be my fear, is I think we need to make sure that we're not going down that path, and what is the ramifications of, not achieving it to the public eye, to Grace's point, if it's going to end up, from a resource standpoint, not being achievable.
Yeah, thank you. I hear you on that. And I think that one of the other things that we should also be thinking about is how do we utilize the current resources that we have to drive some of these changes. So some of it is about systems change, and we have dollars that are currently being invested, and how can we invest those in ways that actually achieve the outcomes we want. So there probably is a required additional investment, but there's also kind of an opportunity to take a look at, back to Jake's presentation, how do we kind of infuse this throughout our approach in government? So thanks for that. Yeah, Stuart.
Yeah, when somebody talks about raising a goal, my first reaction is, what's different that would cause us to increase a goal? Is there a new technology? Is there an increased focus or funding, or are there new mandates that can get us there? And I don't want to sound negative on this, because I think you're doing great things. I was involved in the process with a mobility action plan for the city, and people talked about the goal. Let's make the SLB goal even lower. But at the end of the day, if you modeled what was in that plan, you were looking at a 2 to 3% decrease in the SOV rate, yet our goal was over 15%. And I'm all for increasing those goals, but what's going to be different that warrants us increasing a goal we have not yet achieved?
Yeah, I hear you. And of course, the children and the dog appear at the door the second I'm trying to talk. So I think it's really a great point, Stuart, and very important for us to keep in mind. But it's also something that we are required to do. So I think you said, what's changed? Well, we were created as an office, and the ordinance that created our office said that we are required to set science-based targets, and our current targets are not science-based. So that's really what's changed. A new IPCC report came out. The new science says this is what you need to be doing. And so I think we are trying to communicate with accuracy what is required. And also understanding that it's not as simple as just setting a new goal, that's not, that number in and of itself is not what's going to drive the action and the emissions reductions. It's really going to be the implementation, the strategy, the resources, the planning, the policy. So we are fully committed to doing those things as well, along with the goal.
I had my hand up.
I'm sorry, there's distractions.
Yeah, and I'm not quick enough. I'm not quick
away.
enough with my
If you want
mouse.
to call
getting
up
over
people,
there.
Grace, I'll be right back in one
I was trying to, yeah, go ahead,
Sorry.
Lori.
Oh, I come from sort of the opposite, which is, I think everybody wants us to be bold now. They want us to take these kinds of steps. And I think we have to be we have to do our part globally as well. And I think this is a great step in that direction. And I think the details follow. I like the boldness of it, and I really appreciate it. So I just thought I'd step in and say, from the macro level, I think this is just what we need to do. So thank you.
Great. Great. Well, these are all helpful comments. Does anyone else have any comments or questions? All right. Well, then, by our old favorite Robert's Rules of Order, only people who are members, please vote. And so first I'll entertain a motion. Anyone want to make a motion to approve? You can do hands up. Okay, Jay, I see Jay. A second? Everybody's bouncing on my screen. Aileen, great. Okay, so, and we got a few seconds. Great, so hands down. And now we'll go ahead and take that vote. And so if you want to vote yes, go ahead and use the hands up symbol reaction, and I will try to count them. 9, 10. I've got 10 yes votes, and I've got, okay, then, so that's 10 yes. Would anyone like to vote no? So hands down, sorry, folks, hands down. We got 1 no, and would anyone else like to abstain? Say, so 10 yes, 1 no, so it passes. Armando, I want to tell you, I didn't see a vote for you. So if you were having trouble with that, you can always put it in the, I got a thumbs up, okay. So we've got, sounds like we have 12 yes, 1 no, and so that would mean the motion passes. So thank you for that. And don't, so just so you know, especially Stephen, since you are the no vote, I have been taking notes. And so this will all be reflected in the meeting notes, but not like, you know, by person. We try to keep it generic and just register what were the pros and the cons. So thank you for that. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Science Committee, for doing that work. And now, of course, it's our obligation as CASTR to come back to you. You have made a recommendation to us that we change the city's goal. We will come back to you and report to you on that. Now I'm going to turn it over to Lori, who is going to take us through our next vote. And thank you for your patience on this one, everybody. They just had their meeting yesterday, and they really didn't want to wait until the November meeting to present this to you. So please, let's listen to Lori. And if you were able to look at the email I sent out only a half hour before the meeting, please do. Take it away, Lori.
Thank you. And I do apologize about the timing. It's a learning curve for all of us about what has to be approved and the process. And we had set our meeting a long time ago, the day before this meeting. So we will do better in the future. Just in general, our committee has broken into 2 subgroups, one on waste and one on, we don't really have a good name for it. It's because it's everything. It's tree canopy, open space, and parks. And each of those groups has worked really hard to come up with what our focus would be for the first 6 months. For the waste area, that was pretty easy because most of that was laid out in the climate action task force plan. So we had a pretty good roadmap just to update. And for that group, they didn't get past the first issue. That's all they wanted to focus on. And that's the one I'm bringing to you today. And that's the pay-as-you-throw issue. For the Open Space Committee, we had a lot more work because we really had to combine a lot of other agencies' goals and goals that we had. There wasn't a roadmap that was all written out. So we're really focusing, I think, on tree canopy, on green infrastructure, and also on how do we enhance parklands everywhere, whether it's taking existing lands and making them better as parks, whether it's new development, or whether it's actual acquisition. So we're really focused on the whole outdoor piece. But today, what I want to talk about is, Jake's comment about the hard part is to take a project and a recommendation and make it real. And the pay-as-you-throw has been around for a long time. And I was doing some research on it and came across the announcement by the mayor in 2019 that it was almost ready to go to be announced. Then COVID hit. But pay-as-you-throw, what that does is shifts so that people are paying for the volume of trash that they have. And areas like recycling and compost come in as the free part of the disposal. And this has been done in a lot of other cities. And it really reduces the waste. It diverts the waste in big ways. So I know that people have been working on this for a long time. Our committee voted yesterday and is asking for you all to do the same, to strongly endorse the early adoption by the city of Denver of the pay-as-you-throw program. And we have an accompanying letter that has been edited over and over and over again that would be going to policymakers. And then we have a pretty active outreach plan to work with city council and other decision makers on this. So we're chomping at the bit to turn this into action. Have a lot of activists on our committee want to reach out to the community. And I think I'm certainly not the expert on this, but I just want to say that 75% of what ends up in the Denver landfill could either be recycled, 25% of it, or composted, 50%. The city of Loveland adopted pay-as-you-throw in 1993, and they have a 61% waste diversion rate compared to Denver's rate of 26%. So it's a program, it's a way to act now. It's something that I think everyone's eager on my committee and I think more broadly to enact. And so we wanted to bring it to you all to see if we could get your support. And I'm going to need help on questions because neither my staff person or the other co-chair who can no longer serve, I'm sorry to say, are here today. But Grace, I heard you're an expert on this too. So please back me
Yes,
up.
I can help answer technical questions about it.
Thank you.
Aileen.
Okay, I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say that I love this policy. And what I like about it is how it really focuses on systemizing, creating a system that like individually, it won't make a huge difference if I'm, putting less in the trash and using more compost or using the compost more, but it really incentivizes that act and makes it less of an individual action I can take and extend that individual action to the entire city in a systematic way that creates a more affordable system. It incentivizes people to do the right thing environmentally. So this is the type of policy that I hope we can churn, or recommendation that we can churn out all the time. In my mind, this is like the best thing ever. So not a question, but a little vote of confidence.
Good to know. And I'll just add some technical fact just to make sure that we're all clear. So the pay-as-you-throw concept, the proposal, would apply to the customers that the city and county of Denver picks up. So not totally citywide. That would be a citywide waste, like universal waste ordinance, which is also something that we've talked about. But for the moment, the pay-as-you-throw proposal that you've heard about would just be for single family homes up through 7-unit buildings. That's who the city picks up. And that's about 60% of all residences in the city. Other questions or comments?
I'm wondering
And I
if
see Lisa.
there's,
Go ahead, Marcel.
oops, sorry. I'm wondering if there's data that shows how much waste has been reduced with the implementation of this program.
No, it has not. The proposal that Lori's talking about is the Resource Management Committee would like the city of Denver to institute pay-as-you-throw. So it hasn't done it yet. The idea is that if Denver were to charge people for their waste, but give them free recycling, which they already have, and free compost, which they don't have, that more waste would be diverted from landfill using those. And it's a disincentive to throw more waste in your garbage can.
Understood.
And obviously, it comes with a big outreach education component for all of us to learn how to do it better. And also there's the equity lens to put on it and to make sure that this works for everyone in the community. So those are two big issues we flagged to work on.
All right, I see Lisa and then Naomi.
Sorry, Lori, real quick,
go ahead.
would you be able to share those numbers again? I think I missed them that you shared from other cities at the beginning.
75% of what ends up in the Denver landfill could be recycled, 25%, and composted 50%. And the city of Loveland adopted pay-as-you-throw in 1993, and they now have a 61% waste diversion rate, and Denver's is 26%. Is that what you wanted, Marcel? Great.
Okay, so I think it was Lisa, then Naomi, and then Anna.
It was the equity piece that I was curious to hear more about in terms of the affordability, not disproportionately impacting low-income community members. If you have any numbers or data related to those important pieces.
So Lori, I don't know if your committee had a comment on that. I can tell you that from a city perspective, the city has been working on a proposal for this for years. And we are getting very close to actually having a real proposal that could be shared with the public and actually go into ordinance. I don't have dollar figures that I can give you, but I do know that the city would not implement this program without a robust affordability program that would definitely reduce the cost for some customers and might eliminate the cost for some customers, all based on household income and number of people, which is the area median income table that is used by HOST in their programs and also used by Department of Human Services in some of their other affordability programs. Naomi.
Yeah, I was just curious if there's any details you all could share just about what that outreach plan looks like, either for the counselor office, or it sounds like there might be a partnership component with city council. So I'd love to hear more about that.
And I would also ask if Lori, if your group had any timing on that. So what we're working on now is if pay as you throw is going to become a reality under this current administration, so before 2023, it needs to be voted on by council in probably the next 6 months. And so that does not leave a lot of time for, we certainly wouldn't have time for a task force, right? No time for a climate action task force level of effort, but that doesn't mean we can't do any community outreach. It would need to be focused, and we might, I think that, so whatever it's going to be is still in development, but we know we would not just show up at council with an ordinance without having talked to community members in a number of communities, especially those. I think that we would really need to focus on the communities where recycling uptake is slow, because those neighborhoods would probably feel a need to have the largest garbage bin, which will have the highest cost. And so we would really need to talk with those residents about what do we need to do in implementation in order to help them divert their waste so that they could have the smallest bin. And then also to Lisa's question, what do we need to do to truly make sure that everyone who's eligible for the affordability program knows that it exists and knows how to register for it? I think that would be a big focus of the outreach effort.
And really where we are is we want to stop talking about it and we want to bring it to the fore. We want to take it to council. We want these exact discussions to go on. We want to find the right answer for equity and outreach. But it's just a call to action.
Anna, and then I see you, Stephen.
Well, thanks Resources Committee for this. I think it's really exciting. I have two questions. So one is, I vaguely remember this coming up in like 2019 probably or something, but I don't remember the details. Like who doesn't like this kind of program?
I could tell you who doesn't like it. All the people who think that they get their garbage picked up for free because they already pay for it in their property taxes. That's number one. Without question.
An education thing that can be dealt with.
Yeah, that's still going to be a very tough case to make. I mean, so here's what the through line is. Everybody in the city pays property taxes, whether you rent or own, and whether you live in a single family house or in a large multifamily building. But if you live in a building that has more than 7 units, so 8 units and larger, you already pay for your waste hauling because it's not picked up by the city. So it's a separate contract, and all businesses already have to pay for their own waste service as well. So it's really that community of people in the city are subsidizing the free waste service from residents. But you can hear me as I'm saying that. That is a very difficult message to deliver. And I think it's an even more difficult message for people to hear. So that's where we're going to get the most opposition.
Yep. Okay, that makes sense. And then my second question.
And the council is split on that because of that, Anna. I mean, there's a good number for it, but that's where the work I see has to be done as well.
I see. Okay. Well, so it also sounds like we have a tight timeline here, right? If this is something council needs to vote on in the next 6 months to make it happen under this administration. So my second question is voting on this today and the way the letter is written now going to give the climate office what you all need to move forward with what it sounds like you already have in the works, exploring what this could look like?
I think that any amount of public support that isn't coming just from our office is helpful in this conversation.
Okay.
And we have committee members very, who are already working on this, but would like to do it on behalf of this organization as well.
Okay, I see Stephen and then Marcel.
So to kind of put on to Grace's point, excuse me, in 2019, actually Councilwoman Black was heading up trying to work on a citywide ordinance around recycling in general. And, you know, I was living in an apartment at that time, paying $35 a month for trash pickup. And so I think that, you know, when you look at just the affordability anyway, I mean, you know, that's just one more thing added on to anybody that's living in the multifamily home. So the whole subsidizing piece of it. But Grace, I'm trying to remember the name of the department. You'll have to remind me that handles trash.
Yeah, it's Dottie, and it's their division of solid waste management.
Okay, so the division of solid waste management, they actually had hired consultants. We sat down with the consultants that they had. They were looking. I had moved here from Austin and Ramboma, Austin, so we actually were looking. They were looking at the city of Austin's recycling ordinance. So I feel like that they're probably a lot further along with some of those things than maybe a lot of people know about, since they had a consultant. What they actually figured out, you know, I've got members who have been recycling for 20 years. And so we went through and took tours and all of that so they could see what was already going on in the way of recycling from the commercial side. And I think they figured out where their challenges were. There were going to be more challenges in the multifamily as far as commercial goes, as well then obviously as this kind of pushback on the pay-as-you-go thing. So those were the two things that I think that had we not hit the pandemic, I would imagine we'd even be much further along than that now. So I would hope that maybe it wouldn't, that I'm hoping that maybe we're further along than what we might all realize is kind of my point. Could that be true, Grace?
Yes, I think it's actually very close to gaining support from the administration and within council. But again, you know, we're somewhat of a trusted messenger with different audiences. We're not the only trusted messenger, and we're not the best for some audiences as well. So hearing from others is helpful. Marcel and then Armando.
Thank you, Grace. I really like the idea of this program, but I'm going to be voting no, only because I'm really concerned about the affordability of it when it comes to maybe lower income households. And my biggest concern is the timeline, with their only, you know, this having to be done in 6 months. And I just don't know the proposal or plan that the SASR office or CASR office has in place right now in relation to the equitable portion. I just don't want it to be rushed. So if I saw that, maybe I think I would support it then. And I really do like the program and the idea of it, but I would want to see those things first.
Sure, of course. And I should clarify that I guess what I meant about the timeline is, yes, there would need to be a full package with the rates, and the affordability program would need to be spelled out. That's what needs to be voted on in the next 6 months. The fee itself wouldn't take effect at that time. It's definitely going to need time to, first council votes on it, then solid waste management needs time to actually get people enrolled in the program, to roll it out, to make sure they have all their trucks. And so that's why I'm suggesting that under this administration, and this administration ends in July of 2023. So we have until then to actually implement it, but they can take the vote earlier, so then the city has time to roll it out. But I hear you that if you wouldn't want to vote yes on something until you actually see the numbers, I get that point.
And
Armando.
I think
Oh,
the
go
sooner
ahead,
we
Lori.
can write, I think the sooner we have something written up on the equity, on the specifics, the better. I don't want to wait, but I want to trust that people know that's front and center, and it's not going to pass if that's not really clear to people how it's going to be approached. So you're right on, Marcel.
Okay, Armando.
Yeah, just thinking about the education piece, kind of the natural thing that arises in my head is like, how do you, is there a plan to try to incentivize people to do this correctly? Or is it just going to be a massive logistical hurdle for solid waste management? And if so, I could see that requiring like, you know, an injection of funding into solid waste management to try to deal with people trying to get basically free waste pickup if they claim it's recycling or compost, as if nothing was going to the landfill. That's just kind of a natural thing that arises in my head. And that might be too technical of a question to ask right now, but.
No, I think I get your question. That I think the way I'm hearing it is the risk of contamination. So if people are given, if they're just like, sure, I'll take your small trash bin, and then they put whatever they want in their recycling cart and their compost cart, and then it contaminates, you know, that diversion, that's a problem. So yeah, no doubt, there needs to be, first off, obviously that's an educational issue, education and outreach, but there is going to need to be a compliance function within solid waste management, that they'll need to be doing audits from time to time. They might need to ticket as well. And then eventually, the way it's done now is, you'd be surprised, but some people actually have had their recycling carts taken away because they keep putting garbage in them. And so that is the ultimate penalty, is to have those carts taken away, and then all a person is left with is their black bin. And then all their waste goes in there. But we want to avoid getting to that, because that completely defeats the point of a diversion program.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Aaron.
Just very quickly, I'm very much in the same boat as Marcel. I wonder if, you know, we should gather some of that equity information piece first, or if it's okay coming after. I mean, I like I said, I'm very much in agreement with Marcel's perspective on this, and making sure that's top priority for you know, the vulnerable populations. So yeah, I don't know if maybe this is something that could be tabled for a little while until we have that information, or some more information about that.
And I see Anna's put something like that in the chat. So one thing that we could experiment with, which of course we haven't done yet because we haven't needed to, is our bylaws do allow us to take votes by email. And if we need to, and we're right, we do have another meeting in November as well. So, and since you all did just get this information before the meeting, Lori, perhaps one thing we can do is actually email out this to everybody again, use the Q&A that we've got here today. And maybe if you want to go back to your committee, I haven't even read it completely myself. If there isn't already a statement about affordability and equity in your recommendation, perhaps that could be added, and then send that out to the group for feedback. And you might actually be able to get to a vote digitally before we're at our November meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say we'll never have it perfect. And I think the issues you guys raise are really critical ones. And believe me, we're hearing about it in our committee. We have a lot of representatives making strong statements on it. So I think there are good sideboards on it. That what it says for affordability right now is pay as you throw in Denver will include an affordability element based on average medium income, so that low-income community members will not be disproportionately impacted. Don't know if that answers anything. And then on equity, well, I think that's the only statement I have.
Okay.
So I'm happy to work on answering a few of these. I would just say that what we don't want to do is hold things up to the point that we don't get this to council, you know, that we create process instead of action. So it's a question of how strongly you're concerned about, it's Kaiser who will come up with that equity piece, correct, Grace?
Well, I mean, it's us in partnership with Solid Waste Management and the mayor's office.
Right, but
right.
Yeah.
All right, Aileen.
Yeah, I just wanted before Lori made her comment, I had wanted to echo that comment about, I think we have to be careful about not creating extra bureaucracy. I think what I heard was that we were all generally in agreement that the equity considerations were important. Nothing I heard gave me pause to think that those wouldn't be addressed. Just the fact that it's already been thought through to connect it to the host program, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, that's huge to me, because it demonstrates to me that there is a tool that we can attach this to right away and not have to create something new that immediately addresses a big population that may be adversely affected by this policy, so that we can address some equity issues. And I think it's just really important that we also recognize that we're an advisory board, and this has to go through a lot of other hoops before it ever gets to implementation. And I wouldn't want us asking something to be perfectly stated to get in the way of even starting the process. So I would encourage us to trust our influence and trust our elected officials and continue to work the system, but just get this thing going so that we can actually say something happened.
All right, thank you for that. Now I see Anna and Naomi, but I would like to add, if we could bring this conversation to a close at 6:30, that would be great, because we do still have 2 items that I don't want to miss. I do want to give you an update on the Climate Protection Fund, and I also want to give Marcel time to give a CareJ spotlight, which was also planned for this evening. So Anna and Naomi, and then if somebody can make a motion either to approve or table, that'd be great. Anna.
Yeah, so just quickly, I think I like the idea of voting over email so that we can add a little bit more thoughtful language in there. It seems like we're mostly aligned on that. And one of the ways that we could give ourselves a deadline, right? So we'll plan to vote on it by email on October 5th, which would be 2 weeks from now. And that way we could go back to our teams and get the right language in there. So that's just a suggestion.
Good, well, we might come back to you because that sounds like a motion. So I'm going to go to Naomi and then we'll come back. Go ahead, Naomi.
I was just wondering if we could amend an emotion at this group to maybe say we support this with ensuring these equity questions are a part of the proposal. I don't know if that's an option, but it seems like the group wants to vote over email to have time to think through it. So I could rescind that, but I just want to throw that out as an idea maybe for the future, if not for this.
All right, well, I don't know. Let's go to Anna's motion. Anna, I'm going to restate your motion. It sounds like a motion to ask the Resource Management Committee, or Lori, to provide a succinct written statement by email that addresses the issues raised today in this question and answer session. And that will go out, let's see, today is Tuesday. Lori, we could get that out to the group by Friday and then ask everybody to respond by email by October 5th. So do we have a show of hands to say that you like that process? That could work for you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8. I've got 8, 9 yeses, it looks like. All right, 9-ish yeses would look, because everybody moves when the hands go up and it actually makes it hard to count. But Lori, is this an agreement you and your group could live with?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The only thing is I'm going to need a lot of help to get that piece done by Friday. I assume you all have a lot of that information. I'll work with Charlotte.
Yes, exactly. That'd be great. Okay. But we will, just so everybody knows, we cannot give you numbers.
I know it was the last minute, but I feel like we really.
Yeah, but just to be clear, so everybody knows, I cannot show you any rates and I cannot show you numbers of what affordability might look like, but we can provide you as much information as we've been discussing here in this meeting, but we can put it in writing for you. All right, wonderful. So you can take your hands down.
Thank you.
And, while we're on this roll, Marcel, I'm going to change the agenda a little bit. If you're willing to go first, because we're on this roll with committees. Do you think you could start now and then be complete by 6:45? Then I'll take the last 15 minutes to give the update on the Climate Protection Fund.
Yeah, totally. I appreciate it.
All right, it's all yours, Marcel.
And the last conversation made me really, really excited, actually. Everyone talking about equity and making that, making sure that our proposals are centered around that. So what first, before I start, I want to say that Kiara, our committee co-chair, wishes that she were here, but she had an unexpected health situation. So please keep her in your thoughts tonight. And yeah, so again, thank you all for your highlights today. There was a situation, I would say mostly miscommunication, that we had about a month ago with the CASR office. And I want to thank Grace for addressing our concerns very quickly and thoroughly. And so instead of focusing on what happened, our committee wants to focus on how we move forward with our work on the SAC and our inner workings between committees. So when talking about equity, we want to, I can talk about some of the miscommunication was about the commitment by the city to direct 50% of the climate protection funds towards equity. That's where our thing was about. So I would like to have just a little bit of discussion or thoughts about how we can make sure that all of our committees are centering this and while we're drafting proposals in our conversations. Our committee, the CARE-J committee, really sees ourselves, I think, as the equity or accountability partners for the SAC. And so what we have thought would be a good move forward is potentially having, in discussions like this one that take place in your committees, potentially having one member of our committee sit in on those meetings on your committees, just to not to vote things up or down, but only to increase transparency around what's being discussed and how it's being discussed, so that whenever we come to these conversations, we know with full faith that those conversations have already happened and that they've been thought through thoroughly. So that would be great if y'all were in support of that. The other thing is we had talked about potentially sharing meeting links. So where some of the CARE-J, some members might be on here as attendees and not panelists, but to listen in and to watch these processes. I know that they're live streamed, but our committee meetings are not. So I don't think they are, they might be actually. But if we could share those as well. Now, I don't know if that's too much for some people or if that sounds acceptable, but we would really appreciate that. Just to make sure that there's no confusion in the future. We're on this together for a long time. And so I think that starting this freshly would be great.
So Marcel, I'm wondering if your question, it sounds like maybe there's two questions for the group, but correct me if I didn't interpret this right. I think it sounds like CARE-J is really interested to understand what are the equity conversations like in each of the committees? How is the issue of equity being addressed in their discussions? And then, is there an opportunity for CARE-J members to attend other committees' meetings so that you can listen in on those conversations and then report that back to the CARE-J committee and find opportunities to collaborate?
Yes, exactly. So I think collaboration, I didn't mention that. Thank you, Grace. Collaboration is our goal. And so for instance, I mean, like I said to Lori, I really love that proposal and the idea of it, but I had that one, concern. And so I think that in the future, if we were able to have one member of our committee sit on discussions where your committee is talking about those proposals, and we can really emphasize the need to dive into that information before it comes up to a vote here. We would appreciate that. And then any way that we can collaborate on proposals and kind of put just a stamp on it that it's like, I don't know, equity approved. That sounds kind of weird, but you get what I'm saying. Yeah, I think
Armando, you
Eileen,
had,
Armando.
yeah, Armando had his hand up for a while. I don't know if he meant that, but so Aileen.
Yeah, I was, Marcel, could we do what you're saying, but maybe even add another layer on to kind of get to today's conversation as an example, just kind of have an policy might be the too strong of a word, but maybe a kind of a rule that we have with our committee that any policy recommendation that is being voted on by this board, there is an expectation from the get-go that there should be, that equity should be discussed and addressed in the proposal. And then, so for example, like today, there was some language in the letter, and obviously it wasn't strong enough, but at least as we kind of develop our culture and our norms in this group, I hopefully would think that we would get better at it. And then obviously if your committee is saying, hey, if you want to make sure that your policy can get through the SAC, you know, bring us in earlier on in the process and we can help strengthen that language regarding equity. But if we just say like, look, if you don't have any sort of acknowledgement of how you're going to address equity with your policy, like don't bother or go to CareJ first. Is that okay?
I really like that because I think a big concern about just where this all started was communication between committees where, you know, we thought that, or I mean, whatever, that equity may have been pushed aside or ignored. And I don't know if that was anyone here or if that was, you know, like a staff member at the CASR office. But I think that situation has been addressed and fixed. But yeah, I really like what you said, Eileen. That would be great. And we've considered maybe presenting a proposal just for this body to adopt itself, not to be sent to council or anything, to address that very thing.
Naomi.
Thank you. And this might be more of an offline conversation. So definitely support what your committee is looking to do, Marcel. And we've actually, in our analysis of our recommendations, have equity questions that will be a part of the scoring to help us determine what we will elevate. So like, we've infused it in. I mean, I don't know that it's like, we have some really great questions. So maybe we could work with you to get, not consult, but provide feedback and then share that with this group if that's helpful. Because we definitely don't want to work in silos, but like, we hear you on that. And we wanted to make sure that the equity questions, is this in a nest neighborhood? Are there the necessary supports for implementation? Do we know what those even look like? We want to make sure we're talking about those and considering those before we even bring you all something. So I could share some of those questions offline, and maybe if those work for your group or you have some feedback, we would definitely take it, but we could also share it with this group as well.
Yeah, please do. I think that's a great concept. Stuart?
Yeah, I fully support the equity issue, but I do want to underscore one element in our climate change efforts. Part of what we try to do with various strategies is to use pricing and user fees to allow people to make the right decision about what they do. And how you address this from an equity perspective can be challenging. And I'll just give you one example. Road pricing in the San Diego area was done a while ago. Equity proponents were saying lower income individuals should be able to drive their car for free in these lanes. That's equity. And then after much discussion and engagement, the decision was to take the excess revenue from the roadway pricing to fund a transit system that used that corridor. And then that was considered equity. And it complemented the effort to improve the environment. I'm not trying to provide any answers here or a framework for addressing equity, but I hope that as we look at applying more user fees, that we recognize that price influences behavior. And if we dilute that, we're not going to influence behavior. Now, the issue of subsidization for lower income individuals is a component of that, but that's almost separate from the pricing strategy itself, is all I'm saying. I don't know if that made sense.
No, it did. I mean, that made perfect sense. And I think that the solution that you all were able to come to with the transit solution came out of those discussions that we would hope to have with other committees before proposal is brought forward for a vote. So I think you're talking about the same thing. We'll definitely keep in mind the totally understand the price influence behavior note that you made. So thank you. So we're not really looking to vote on anything if anyone's waiting for a motion to be made. But I just wanted to present that so that it stays in the forefront of your minds when you're engaging those conversations. And then I would expect that Kiera or myself would communicate more with Naomi and everyone else who made comments, and then maybe present some proposals about this at the November meeting.
Thank you so much, Marcel. And I tell you, my wheels are turning during this conversation, and I'm hearing a couple different avenues that we can look at. As an agency, we tend to be people who think in terms of process, and we like to make things uniform and standardized. And so there certainly could be a way for us to do that across the committees that, as you said, for example, any proposal that comes forward must address X, Y, Z. And one of those things needs to be, how does this address equity? How does this address climate change? What are the greenhouse gas impacts of this policy? So we can do that in a way that is routinized, so that all the committee conversations start to get focused in moving in the same direction. So it's great that you brought this up. I think there's a lot more for us to think about here. And I think we can definitely make progress in the coming weeks. Go ahead, Marcel.
Thank you, Grace. And then I just want to say to Naomi that scoring system may be a good compromise, which would also work with all of our crazy schedules so that we don't have to sit in on a meeting. If there's like a document that's presented, the scoring system with the proposal or something like that before it comes out of a committee. So we can talk more about that for sure. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. All right, well, we've got just enough time left. Boy, I hope I didn't leave anything else off the agenda. This was a very full agenda today, and thank you all for that. So if I'm going to do this correctly, I am going to share my screen. Nope. Taylor, are you able to let me screen share? I just tried and it wouldn't let me. Oh, now it will. Yay. Here we go. I don't know what you're seeing my slideshow, but you're seeing the whole thing, right? Ugh, I have two screens up and I'm using my mouse pad, not the mouse. Hang on. Great. Okay, so I am pleased to give you this Climate Protection Fund update. Let's get right to it. Oh, this is a slide that's going to be difficult to see, and I will send this out to all of you. I wanted to at least give you, this is what an ugly timeline looks like, but I like it because it gives a sense of how much has been happening in less than the last year. So just to recap, we became in office in July of 2020. The ballot initiative 2A passed in November, and here we are now at September, where we're very close to having our draft ready to discuss with the mayor and then get into production and share it with you by November 3rd, which is our deadline. I'm not going to run through every one of these lines. Like I said, I will send it out to you, but I would like to point out a couple of things that right from the very beginning, by April, we were already making financial commitments to the public for funding. And by now, we have already released 4 requests for proposals to the public, and one which is a little bit different, which is a program application for an incentive. Our STEAM to electric conversion program is an application rather than a request for proposal. But so we have been moving really quickly to get funding out. And I hope that in the last couple emails from our office, you've seen some of those RFP links and have been able to share them with your communities. So what I want to do today is just to give you the highlights of what this plan is trying to do, what this plan is and what this plan is not trying to do. So this is the 5-year plan. So the document that we're going to be coming out with in November needs to be relatively timeless. It's got to cover what we want to come out of this first 5-year period. And so it makes more broad statements, it's less focused on we're going to fund XYZ project, because that's not what this document's about. So I want to begin with equity. This plan is absolutely centered around equity. What you see here in this blue box is just one of our statements about our commitment to this work. And these metrics, these are only a small sampling of metrics, but these are ones that speak specifically to how we will measure whether or not the funding provided through the Climate Protection Fund has actually made a difference in the lives of people in our under-resourced communities and under-resourced people specifically. So again, I don't expect you to read through all of it. I will be sending this out to you, but you can see here, we're really talking about easing the cost burden for the lives of our under-resourced neighbors, reducing exposure to air pollution, improving their quality of life. Obviously, we'll be counting the number of people and communities who are served by these dollars. And we're hoping that we will be able to generate metrics from our funded projects that will actually talk to or speak to the avoided costs for these communities, which is so important. And of course, with our workforce development focus, are we truly providing people access to good jobs? How are you going to be able to hold us accountable? This is so important, and we absolutely believe in this. So, like I said, although the 5-year plan is this one document for this 5-year period, we will be producing annual reports. We say by June 30th, that's only because the way the city's accounting works is although the year ends at December 31st, we don't always get the actual accounting until sometime in the first quarter. We absolutely plan and hope to produce reports prior to June 30th of every year, but at a very minimum, no matter what, they will be out by that year. And what you see here is what we will be reporting. So how have we spent the money? What has it been spent on? What is the progress of those projects? And what has the impact been in addressing climate change, but also on, again, on that quality of life, on how we have addressed equity in these projects, how much of that funding has gone to that 50% requirement, which we know to be a floor and not a ceiling. So you'll be seeing all of this in these annual reports. Now I'd like to walk through what are the basic outcomes that we want to see in each of the allowable uses. Rest assured, there is so much more in the more detail in the plan, but I thought that for tonight, with the limited time we have, I should really focus on what are the outcomes that we want to see at the end of this 5-year period, and of course beyond, that we want to produce with these dollars. So first, workforce. It's really about what's the quality of the jobs that are being funded by this work? Are we reducing the barriers and increasing access for people who need jobs to get these jobs, and ensuring that the jobs that are being funded align with our climate sustainability and resiliency priorities? And that's a little bit of a nuance, but it's important because there are so many project ideas coming to us. We need to be able to filter and say, yes, these proposals really meet all of these objectives. And you know what, these other proposals, they have wonderful, great, smart objectives, but they don't meet all of the criteria of this fund. We need a plan like this to be able to give us that filter. Renewables. Renewables, as you can imagine, the primary goal here is greenhouse gas emissions reductions. This is all about avoiding emissions by moving our our electricity consumption to renewables and away from the conventional grid. But there's other functions too. When we fund infrastructure, any infrastructure project that we fund must have workforce requirements. You will see that in all of our projects. We obviously want to be able to calculate bill savings. And of course, all of the work that we do in renewables contributes to resiliency as well. Climate and environmental justice, and the next one that we'll get to, adaptation and resiliency. You know that we still need to do work here. We need to co-create this work with communities. These categories are not about us in CASR sitting in our offices figuring out what communities need. So as you can see here, our focus in our outcomes are, have we provided opportunities for people in our communities to actually influence the work that gets funded in this category? That is so important to us. And then the idea of equal protection. We're really trying to define what is a city agency's role in climate and environmental justice. And so we have high hopes here, and you are definitely going to be seeing in 2021 a focus from us on actually getting out into communities and working with communities to determine the work that needs to be done. Adaptation and resiliency, very similar to what I discussed. What we really want to see here is we want the outcome to be that it doesn't matter where you live in Denver or what your income is or what color your skin is or what your physical abilities are. You need to have the same ability to be resilient to climate changes and to be able to adapt to those changes as people who have more income and more access currently. So we want to bridge that gap. We want to bring that injustice down. And that's going to be the focus of the work in this category. Transportation, again, going back to a more conventional subject here in climate action, greenhouse gas emissions reduction. But again, as we've talked about before, there's only so much that this fund can do in transportation compared to, say, DOTI or RTD. I mean, those are the agencies that have big money that can really change how people move and get around and how accessible their neighborhoods are. But we can have an impact too. We can really work at a hyper local scale. We can work on smaller, more intimate mobility projects, and we can really work on vehicle electrification and e-mobility. And that's where we're going to put our emphasis and make sure that all people have access to this new technology, not just those who can afford it today. And finally, we come to buildings. We know that the amount of money that we can spend from this fund on physical projects will not be enough to truly reduce emissions in Denver, but we can also spend a lot of our focus on policy. The amount of emissions that we can reduce through changes in public policy will completely outstrip what we're able to fund through the Climate Protection Fund. But what we can do here is we can use these dollars and pair them with those policies and focus them on the communities and buildings and people who need them the most. And so that's the type of focus that you're going to see coming out of this fund. Is we have big policy plans that are going to apply to buildings and homes citywide over the coming decades, but we're going to focus the dollars from this fund on those buildings that need the help the most. So buildings in our under-resourced communities and buildings that may not be in under-resourced communities, but that serve under-resourced people. That's where you're going to see a lot of our focus. So the commitments to date, you've seen these mentioned in some of our newsletters and you've heard about them, but I wanted to give you the summary here. On the right side, we have the smaller list of our internal City and County of Denver agreements. That's what CCD agreement stands for. These are funding agreements we can make between agencies that are just between us. They don't go out to public bids. So for example, DOTI is going to be creating this fall, they'll be launching the Montbello Circulator, which is a series of 3 vehicles that will move people around Montbello, get them to and from the transit stations. One of those vehicles is going to be an electric vehicle. We are funding that vehicle. So that's an agreement between us and DOTI. Now they're going out to bid for that, but we didn't have to go out to bid. We're just contributing to their effort. Behind the meter solar, that is, those are solar panel projects that are installations that are going on City and County of Denver buildings. We don't consider those to be really public facing. That's simply behind the meter. It's great. It helps Denver reduce our carbon footprint. We think that's important to do. And of course, staff positions. So I'm very pleased that we hired our first staff position under the Climate Protection Fund. And that is our Green Workforce Liaison. That person just started with us last month. What we also have, though, what we've really been focusing on, and I hope that this is pleasing to see within this first year, that we have 6 RFPs, and again, the incentive application that are already out there, and we still have more in the queue right now. We are completely overwhelming our city attorney's office, which is the last stop before a contract or a proposal can go out to the public. And we have, I believe, 2 or 3 big ones that are sitting with them right now that are going through review that we hope to be out before the end of the year. So we're excited about the amount of work that we've been able to do so far. And I believe this is my last slide. I don't know if anyone has read the budget book. I wouldn't have expected you to, but this is what you will see in our allocation for 2022. And I want to make a distinction between what this 5-year plan is going to show you and what you see in the budget book. So the way that we are budgeted in the city, we only do 1 year at a time. The 5-year plan, on the other hand, shows we'll end up showing you where we think the allocation is going to be at the end of the 5-year period across these allowable uses. I think this next year looks pretty accurate in terms of where I think the allocation will end up at the end of the 5 years. You're really going to see a lot of emphasis on mitigation. We know that the time value of carbon means we have got to stop putting greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere as fast as possible. So you'll see a lot of our funding going to that. At the same time, we have to get out into community. And like I said earlier, we have got to co-create the plans and the work with people in their communities. And so I think that this strikes a healthy balance among all those priorities. So I believe, yep, that is the last of my slides. I will take that down. Nope, I don't know if that did it. That didn't do it. Hang on. I have to slide between screens. There we go. Now I can see you all again. And questions, comments, thoughts. I hope that in that brief summary, you saw some reflection of the conversations that you've been having at your committees over the last few months. At this point, I will tell you that when I read the draft of the plan, I've had so many conversations with you and so many other stakeholders. You can't tell who wrote what, because it's all truly reflective of the combination of people who have been providing us with input all this time. I'll stop. Any hands up, any questions? Okay. I see some thanks in the chat, so I appreciate that. Thank you. I know that was really fast, but like I said, I will be able to send that out to you. Great. Well, and if anybody wants to tune in for my budget presentation, it's Mr. Cashman's here. He'll be chairing that meeting on Friday at 10 a.m. I think, or 10:40 a.m. And that, of course, is about our whole office, not just the fund. All right, well, we have 5 minutes left, which actually means that we have time for announcements. If anybody has information about events or other points of interest from the organizations that you represent, happy to entertain that now.
Hey, this is Anna. I just have a quick question.
Sure.
Marcel, you had mentioned like making sure all of our stuff is live and accessible by committee, and I think that's a great idea. But it prompted me to look at what it looks like when our meetings are live anyways on Facebook. And it looks like there's comments in here that I don't think are showing up in our comments that we can see on the Zoom here. So like someone asked a question about the first presentation we had related to the city climate pledges. And then someone asked a question about the gas plants in Denver as well. So just wanted to flag that we're getting those, and we might need to plan to like look at those during these meetings.
That's a good question. I'm going to put Taylor on the spot because I know that we are able to, like all your chat, we're able to get that as a document at the end of the Zoom meeting. So we're able to capture that. Since I'm here, I have no idea what this looks like on Facebook Live. Taylor, do you have any idea what this looks like? And are we able to recover those comments?
Yes. So they're all up on Facebook Live. I can certainly copy and paste them and send them out to the group for more discussion. We do advertise these as listen in for the public. I think between committee members, maybe there's a different role if there's committee members versus the public. We try to provide information for questions, but there are some things that maybe the committee themselves need to be the ones to have a response to. So I'm the one putting like factual information or links and things in the chat for those groups. But we can certainly look at a more robust plan for how we address comments on any kind of live streaming that we do.
And then Taylor, do you know, like, would we be able to go in later to that same feed and provide answers?
Yes.
Okay, that's something I'm sure we can work on. Stuart.
Yes, I just wanted to remind everyone that CDOT is facing a major change in how they fund projects, and they're going to align with climate change objectives. There are public hearings happening right now, and we're always looking for people to support the position of making transportation investments in a climate sensitive way. The next public hearing is this Friday at 3 o'clock. It is virtual, even though it is in Colorado Springs. So I would encourage anybody who has interest in that to sign up. You have to sign up by Thursday at 11 a.m. I'll see if I can send around the link for that. But any support you can provide and ideas, this is a monumental change for our state. That's all.
Marcel.
Thank you all again. Thank you, Anna and Armando. Prize for reaching out first and adding us to that calendar. I would I'm going to drop Kiera and I's emails in the chat. If you wouldn't mind emailing us if you're comfortable with a member of the CARE-J committee being in on one of those meetings, at least until we discuss this scoring system more with the equity piece. We'd really appreciate that. Or just add us to the calendar invite, and if we can't make it, we'll reach out to y'all with someone who can. Thanks again.
All right, Stephen, is your hand still up or just up again? Oh, not Stephen, Stuart. Sorry, Stuart, is your hand up again? Or okay, wonderful. Look at that. We made it to 7 o'clock. We were right on the dot. Thank you, CARE-J. Thank you, SAC, so much. Wonderful to see you all. Excellent attendance. Thank you. We will be in touch again with by the end of the week with the presentation on the CPF from tonight, and also with the recommendation from the Resource Management Committee for your review and consideration. So thank you. Good night.